Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Opapari, and this is the Songwriters on Process podcast. Since 2010, I've been interviewing songwriters about their writing process. And on this podcast, we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process, far deeper than the usual. Do you start with the lyrics or the music question? By way of background, I have a PhD in English literature, and I'm a prose writer myself. I'm not a songwriter. In fact, I've never written a song in my life. But my goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers and poets, just as writers, plain and simple, and I've always been interested in the writing process. This is an intelligent conversation between two writers. And on this podcast, like I said, we go deep into the process. We talk about rituals, the seeds of inspiration, the role of movement on the process, writer's block, the revision process, pens, pencils, types of paper, and of course, we talk about books. You can find all the archived interviews on the Songwriters on Podcast website and across all streaming platforms. And with that, let's dive into this week's episode. And today on the podcast, all three members of Bonny Horseman, Aeneas Mitchell, Eric D. Johnson, and Josh Kaufman. Now, I have had on Aeneas Mitchell in the past couple of years. I had talked to Mitchell. I interviewed her along with her friend Charlotte Cornfield. They were on the podcast together, and I had Johnson on within the past year to talk about his work with the Fruit Bats. But now with Kaufman on, the circle is complete. All three of them at the same time. They have a new double album out. And who does double albums anymore? I'll tell you who I will answer my question. That is Bonny Horseman, because, I mean, talk about collectively overwhelming creativity among the three of them. The new album is called Keep Me on Your Mind, See You Free. It is out now on Jaguar Records. It's fantastic. And I enjoyed this a lot. I've been interviewing bands recently, all the band members at the same time. I had Dive on recently, Future Islands. I had Joseph, The Head and the Heart, and I'm sure others as well. Just can't think of them off the top of my head. But what I enjoyed about this interview was listening to them reminisce about the recording and the creating of the album. And they probably more so than the other interviews really talked a lot about the collective process behind this album. And we did delve into their individual songwriting processes, but this was a lot of discussion about how they wrote this album. And all three of them, I mean, individually, there's insane talent there, but collectively, it spills over. And so this was a lot of fun hearing them talk about how it went. Anyway, the new album, again, double album, is called Keep Me on Your Mind, See You Free. And here is my interview with Bonny Horseman. Eric, because you're the first one you're going from left to right on my screen. We'll start with you. So I have a quote by David Byrne that I just read recently. And David Byrne said, "A car is a good place to write lyrics. Driving occupies one part of the brain, freeing up the other." And that reminds me of the Agatha Christie quote when she said, the best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes. So I've always interpreted that to mean that our best ideas come to us. There was an article in the Washington Post within the past 6 months about how we get our best ideas in the shower. That's when the ideas come, when we're not trying to think about ideas. So, Eric, I'll start with you. How often does that happen when you get bursts of creative inspiration when that's the last thing on your mind?
I mean, that's the best way to get it. I think, and I believe we actually talked, you and I talked a little bit about this when we, on the last one, but I think we even mentioned that Agatha Christie quote, which I love. Yeah, I mean, there's, and it's definitely different from this, which obviously we'll get into. It's different with this band because it really is quite collaborative, especially on this last thing that we did. But yeah, I mean, that's like, I love that David Byrne quote. And also, you should have asked Josh that, because David Byrne I just found out, was Josh's wife's childhood crush, or that was who. Josh's
He
wife
wanted to,
married.
Annie wanted to marry David Byrne when she was like 7.
Yeah,
That's a good one for a 7-year-old. That's like so classy of her, right?
very
I
classy.
think so. She's still, I mean, I think she's like reneged on the proposal, but she's but she still loves David Byrne. I think he loves me more, but
the way of like kind of coming like the freeing of your mind for writing is I mean that's strong for me, and I can't speak for these other two, but that's in yeah, writing while driving is very common for me, or at least sort of putting the tape recorder of my brain on record while driving is something that I do.
So do you get ideas? That's the car is a good place for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've written whole songs in the car, and the voice memo really helps. I actually wrote a whole song once in the car where I had the instrumental of the song, and this was back in the days of CDs, CD players in the car, and like I had a single disc CD player, and I had the instrumental bounced on a CD-ROM or a CD, not CD-ROM, a CDR instrumental, and then with the iPhone voice memo on, and was singing like sort of over the top of the instrumental over and over again on a drive from Seattle to Portland, and wrote the whole song that way. So that's probably the most strongest implementation of that I've ever done. But yeah.
All right, Josh, how about you then? Do you get do ideas come to you when you're not thinking about those ideas coming to you?
yeah, I think so. I think before I play devil's advocate on that, I think I will say that like I feel like for me it's more like cooking, although I do drive a lot, but I drive my kids around a lot, so there's not a lot of like free headspace, if you can imagine. Send you some spy cams I took this morning if you're interested. But so it's not like I have a lot of free headspace in there. That said, kids say the darndest things. So sometimes you get like ideas, some like cool naive ideas for songs. My daughter I have an instrumental record coming out later this year, and my daughter named it just by one morning asking me, what do the people in your mind say to each other? And I was like, that's a pretty great thing. That's sort of, kind of grabbing that stuff. And that did happen in the car. But I'd say more often than not for me, it's like a cooking thing. If people are in the house or like occupied and I have time in the kitchen. And actually, similarly to what Eric was saying, I can put on a piece of music or maybe a demo of something that we have, maybe as a band that's like not quite finished, and sort of let my subconscious react to it in a way and get filled up. Like fill up the cachet that way. So yeah, I think probably when I'm not leaning into it as much as when maybe I'm most surprised by the inspiration. But that said, I think I really do enjoy like kind of especially getting together with Eric and Anais and like actually just working on stuff. And I think we get some great ideas that way too. Although I don't know that we know that they're good until later. I think you just have to sort of trust it.
The cooking thing makes so much sense, and on the new record, there's like many of Josh's lyrical contributions. He talks about cooking eggs somehow, at least twice, maybe 3 times.
Yeah,
Josh
well, one of the
good at cooking eggs. Like Josh makes really good eggs.
Yeah,
they're fluffy and light, and there's
Thanks,
little things in them. There's the chives.
I could go for Josh eggs right now.
So, okay. So I've heard cooking a few times, like not often, but I have heard cooking. So is it that cooking just free? Is it something about the act of it, like the creating? Because there's something still involved in creating when you're cooking. So I don't feel like that's as empty as like driving or, folding clothes.
Totally.
And I don't know. I think that's interesting that because I have heard cooking occasionally, but it's funny. Songwriters tell me that cooking is a way not for them to get ideas, but to clear their mind so they're fresh later on.
That's interesting. I could see that too. Yeah. I mean, it's so musical, but really, I guess like all this stuff is really when you think about it. But I guess like the sort of like trying to marry like in your mind maybe like how these like flavors are going to react or something it's like it is pretty musical. And if you think about harmony and like throwing in ideas and not just like harmony between distance between notes, but like harmony of like the way a word feels like over a chord or something like that, and how those things can change depending on how you put them all together.
Yeah. Aeneas, how about you? Is that what's your take on ideas coming to you when you're not thinking about them?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I'm sort of like a person that I will sit kind of at the desk, and sort of bang my head against the thing, like, I'm gonna get there. And I forget that, like, oh yeah, probably if I went for a walk around the block, it would be better than what I'm doing. I Yeah, I'm in New York right now. I've been coming down here kind of more lately because my show is down here, and I drive from Vermont. It's like 4.5 hours, and people are always like, that's a long drive. But my kids are not in the car, and I love it. Like I don't even listen to music. I'm just like love to play with words in my head, like on a drive. And yeah, I don't know if I said this on our other podcast, but I had this amazing experience. Like, so talking about my show, Hadestown, like when I was working on Hadestown and I was living in New York for a while, I was working in my friend's studio, which was around the Prospect Park from where my apartment was. And I would bike there. So I would get on the bike and I would ride around Prospect Park and sometimes like go all the way around the park and then so like do 1.5 times and then go to his place. And I always had like incredible ideas on the bike on the way to his house. And then I would get there, go in the studio, and then kind of like be at the desk and like nothing else would happen, And I was telling this to I got a chance to interview Margaret Atwood. Did I ever tell you guys this?
No.
It was like I'm like have gone to this conference called the Folk Alliance since I was a young folk singer. And they put together this virtual event where I got to interview Margaret Atwood for a Folk Alliance event. And it was during kind of pandemic Zoom time. And I was describing this to Margaret Atwood, and she goes, "What you need is a stationary bike." And I was like, that's so smart. That's what I need, a stationary bike.
I have a stationary bike, and I do write song lyrics whilst riding a stationary bike, and it's good exercise too.
Totally. The problem is that I got a Peloton, and they yell at you like they're just.
I know that's a whole. I bought like an $80 just Amazon.
Yeah,
it's a folding, like it's like designed for like small New York apartments to fold and put in your closet. It's like no frills, $80 Amazon.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this. I may have mentioned this to some of you, but I wrote an article. I had an article in the Washington Post about the impact that exercise has on higher order thinking, executive functions. So I'm a big runner, and there's very clear evidence that aerobic exercise, there's a chemical in the brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor that gets secreted through increased blood flow, which is exercise. So they put people on a treadmill for 20 minutes at 60% max heart rate. And that's not much more than a moderate walk. And then after that, those 20 minutes, they give them a battery of tests that measure executive function. And those people always score higher than people who didn't exercise. And the benefit lasts for about 90 minutes post-exercise. So it's pretty amazing stuff. So when people say they get ideas on walks and we're exercising, there's actually, it's been replicated in the lab that a small bout of exercise, they call it a bout, but there's parameters. What's interesting is that the ideal is 30 minutes at 60% max heart rate. So it's not dose responsive. So 60 minutes isn't twice as good as 30 minutes, and 90% heart rate is better than 60%. And the benefit lasts about 90 minutes post-exercise, but it needs to be an exercise that doesn't involve executive function. So if you're walking in an urban environment, it's not as effective as a natural environment because you're trying not to be hit by cars. They found that if people who are back when Wii Fit was around, not that long ago, but if people were playing Wii Fit, the benefit was wiped out because they were using their brain while they were exercising. So like Eric, you talk about the stationary bike, that's probably more effective than if you were like riding a bike in an urban environment because that's taxing your brain as it is.
Yeah, I'm a runner too, and I live in a very quiet neighborhood, and I don't ever feel like I have to use my brain when running. It's like there's no big streets to cross or anything like that. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the research is fascinating and has enormous implications for all walks of all types of work. But the benefit is it's very clear, but it needs to be like if you're going to watch television, it probably should be a TV show that involves bachelors and bachelorettes, not like PBS or Frontline or something, head that taxes your brain. Josh, I'll ask you this. Do you get like when you're outside doing those things, whether you're walking or driving, are you consciously aware of the environment and getting song ideas from things that you hear and things that you see?
Probably. I don't know. I guess I tend to live in more like I've always lived in, wouldn't say loud urban environments, but pretty urban environments. I like to think that I pay pretty careful attention to what I'm going by, and I'm sure that influences me, but I don't know that I'm like thinking about how to harness it into a song in the moment. I think I don't know. It's I mean, if I'm being honest, I think it's like maybe like a little bit, I guess because I don't like practice songwriting. I think maybe the same way that maybe that my other songwriter friends do. If I'm usually like surprised by an idea and then I just kind of chase it down. If I'm being honest, it's usually how it goes. Yeah. I think when I was younger, I used to like try to write songs like all the time, but I know I don't do that anymore. Maybe when I'm older than I am now. Maybe when I.
And Nance, how about you? Have you ever heard anything, seen anything, and you think immediately, oh, that should be in a song?
Usually like a little phrase, like a little turn of phrase. And I'll text it to myself.
Mm.
And ideally look back at my text with myself at some point. But like I love a little turn of phrase that is part of, it's like a well-worn, like a stone that has been worn smooth because we just say it all the time, but then if you hold it to the light, it actually means a bunch of different things. I love songs like that. You know who I think is so good is Ron Sexsmith at that.
I was just gonna say Ron Sexsmith. He like
right?
turns the phrase like no one else. It's amazing.
Yeah. I'm thinking of that song, Seem to Recall, Seem to recall. And it just like, it flows out of the mouth, which is good for songs. Any of those phrases that we've worn them smooth by using them so much, it just flows out of the mouth. But then he puts them in a chorus and suddenly like it means all these different things and it's beautiful.
Yeah. I love that about him too. He just celebrated like his 60th birthday up in Toronto. He played what am I thinking of? What's the place?
Horseshoe?
No, like the big
Massey Hall.
Thank you, Massey Hall. It was like back in February or something, and I remember talking to Annie about it. I was like, "Fuck, I think I might have to go to that," but then of course it went by, and I didn't. But yeah.
All right, so I'm going to read another quote. This is from I had Mary Timoney, the guitarist songwriter, on the podcast a couple months ago. Loved the interview, and she said the only thing that works for me is writing a lot of really bad stuff that I don't like. So here's what she does, and I love this. She said she'll write in the morning, set it aside for 12 hours, and then come back because she is a different person 12 hours later. So the idea that you are not the same person. So, but I love the deliberateness of that 12 hours later, she's not the same person that she was. So it's like having an additional editor and if she had looked at it immediately, she's the same person. But 12 hours later, it doesn't matter what she did, she's not the same person. But I love that recognition, but the deliberateness of giving it time because I'm not the same person. So turning that into a question, Eric, I'll ask you this. Do you think distance is an important part of the revision process?
1000%. Also, I love Mary Timony, by the way. And that's a great quote. 12 hours might be too short for me personally. I might not be as different of a person 12 hours later. I'm pretty close to my 12 hours before self. But a few days later, even maybe and certainly like a few weeks later, a few months, sometimes years, I had I think we talked about this in our interview or the Fruit Bats interview, but like I had a 23-year-old lyric that finally made it into a song on the last Fruit Bats record that it had been sort of in a notebook for 23 years. So that's quite some time to like let it maybe it wasn't even because it was like not a good line or I liked it better 23 years later. It was just it didn't have a home yet. So I love that though. I also just lyrically, yes, and musically too. Sometimes, and I'll sort of just mention this band. There's something about giving it to an actual different person too. Like if you're a different person 12 hours from now, there's also might be like a different person in the room with you too, who has a sort of a vested interest in this thing, or who tells you it's good or tells you it's bad, or just gives it another dimension. But 100% like time and become. I love that, becoming a different person. But for me, probably more than 12 hours would be needed.
And Aeneas, I'll go to you next. But it's funny because my thought is the more distance I have from something, the less likely I am to like it. I feel like I don't look at things I wrote a year ago and go, wow, that's really good. It's almost, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wrote that. And maybe that's just me, but I wish I could look at things and say, wow, that's better than I thought it was. But yeah, Aeneas, how important is distance to you? And do you use that deliberately as a part of the process?
Yeah, that's cool. I identify with everything, Eric, that you said. And right. And I think you said this earlier, Josh, it's like, we don't know if it's good. Like when it first happens, you have to be in love with whatever you're trying out. Like you have to just be saying yes, or else nothing ever will come out. So you're like in love with it. And then a lot of times, like, yeah, I'll come back and be like, oh, that's actually shitty. Like, but I didn't know it at the time. And it has made this is a little like easier if there is someone else to bounce it off of. Like I'm thinking, Eric, of when like writing I Know You Know, like the chorus of I Know You Know, which, because interestingly, a bunch of stuff that we've recorded on all three of our records happened at the very last minute.
Yeah.
And like in the studio, we had come in with a bunch of material, but then there's like one or two songs that were just like, let's throw this at the wall. And they end up kind of being our faves in a way, like that often happens. And I felt that like working on those lyrics like right before, and then you sang it like 10 minutes later. Like, I don't know that we even quite knew, is it good? Is it good before we threw it down? Right?
No, we did not. But we try. I think that's the thing about our collaboration is we trust each other. Maybe would we have? I could ask you this: like, would you have, if you were making an Aeneas Mitchell record and did that? Would you have the confidence to just go bust it out 10 minutes later? I don't know if I would. Maybe, but like it's better when you have another person. I think.
Yeah.
It's 4 years, right. Or in our case, 6 years. So
yeah.
So with the new album, then double album, I should say. So is there a song on there And I have this conversation a lot with songwriters, and I hear there's some writers too. So I'll ask a question, but I want to give you this quote first. This is from H.L. Mencken. He said, "The value of writing seems to be in inverse proportion to the ease of writing. Whatever flows freely and bubblingly turns out to be sorry stuff a week later." So the value of writing seems to be in inverse proportion to the ease of writing. Whatever flows freely and bubblingly turns out to be sorry stuff a week later. And occasionally songwriters will tell me they don't trust the stuff that comes quickly. That's the stuff where they think, that was a little too easy. And they're less likely to trust those things and maybe to throw those things out. So, Josh, how do you feel about that? Maybe is that, do you trust those things that come quickly? And we can talk about that in the context of this album or generally.
Trust. I don't know, but I do love them. Like I love them so much. I don't know that I always like, I think I trust that they're like that they like present themselves for a reason and that they're like a doorway to something great. And I often like, I wouldn't say I'm dogmatic about it, but I do really love the first ideas like so much. And I love them like just even not just from a writing perspective, but just like from like like an instinctual perspective, you know, like I love that stuff so much. Sort of like that first impression, which is cliche, but so real, you know, just like that taking something on face value is really kind of awesome. I think there's like weirdly a lot of depth to it, that you can almost, and maybe a lot of like soul to it that you can like scrape away from it if you overwork it, to use the like food analogy again, like overwork the dough, you know what I mean? And this just becomes crumbly. But yeah, I guess everybody reacts to that stuff differently. But I tend to go with those first instincts. Those first thoughts seem kind of cool to me.
And are you?
That's Josh's. I think Josh's Josh's great superpowers as a producer is actually to be able to recognize those instant, like better than many producers, I think, to sort of recognize immediacy. And I very much disagree with old H.L. Mencken's quote there, at least from a songwriting perspective. I think songs are they're of any art form, and doesn't have to just be songs, but like I think songs have a real immediacy to them. And personally, all of my most successful stuff for my own solo career is always the last minute shit. So I don't know, and I think people can hear that. But not that I don't like tinkered with Brian Wilson stuff either. But yeah, Josh's superpower is his instinct.
Yeah, Josh, go ahead. Your hand
I don't
is
want to
raised.
speak out of turn. Thanks, Eric, for saying that. I just wanted to I lost my thought. Oh no, I didn't. It's back. So I guess what I was going to say is like, I think for all of us, we've been making music and writing songs for like a really long time, like decades and decades, right? So like your first thought is actually informed by like many years of like subconscious pining, and also just like and just like active collaboration and active like engagement with this craft. So like it's almost like to say that first idea is like kind of like just drivel is like, it's not really trusting like all the work that you've put in, which is like massively significant. And like I think in the case of like the three of us is like has like proven itself, so like there is like a little like, yeah, maybe it is trust. You're sort of trusting yourself, really, which if you can't trust yourself,
I have some thoughts on this one too. I feel like this whole band for me actually has been like an exercise in learning to trust what feels like easy and intuitive, because I definitely, like I said, like I like to like bang my head against the wall and like work hard. And it's like, if it didn't take a long time, maybe it's not good. And right from the get-go, I think of working on these songs with these guys, it was like, oh, this feels flowy. So how could it be good? But actually it is, it does feel like it is. But I also love to edit. Like I love to try to push something to a different place. And a lot of times we'll have first ideas and I'll try to push a lyric somewhere else and then it goes back. Do you know what I mean? But it feels good to me to have tried. You know what I mean? Like even that song I'm thinking about Love or Take It Easy, right? The chorus of that is kind of was the first thought, right? And then, but we went somewhere else with it. We went to like, Love or Take It, loving is a season, let it come and go. Remember?
Yeah.
And that was like, ooh, that's like vibey. But ultimately, it didn't want to feel that heady or something. It wanted to be what fell out of the mouth first. And we went back. And so I guess what I'm saying is I don't feel scared that to edit a thing is that it's going to get overwrought and overworked. Like I think you can always go back or something. And that the first thought will tell you if it's actually the best and it wants to come back.
Well, Anais is such a good editor too. I've like learned so much from her, like doing my own stuff is like no line left behind, I call it, like where it's just kind of like, is this the right idea? Can we try 4 other versions of it? And then sometimes that it's like, it is okay to throw something away that's good because it might be good, but maybe it's not right. It's sort of like doing an etching or something. It's like you're scraping away at the paint and then it's really awesome in the end.
And also like a thing I feel like I'm like grasping with this band is really that like 80% perfect is better than 100% perfect. Like, it doesn't want to be, songs don't want to be 100% perfect. It's like, you just don't want that. It doesn't feel good. Perfect isn't even a good word. Like,
yeah, there was like, I remember when we were working on our first record, there's like a lot of sort of reimagining of traditional songs, and there's that to a degree on the second and third record too, and smaller, maybe less apparent ways. But it's like, I remember Anais, like you saying, like, because sometimes we would take them so far out and be like, oh, I think we may have broken it. We may have broken it, and it's the song actually would tell you. It would like tell you if you broke it or not. And you're like, oh, this feels like, it's not like the arc feels wrong. It's just not, and then it kind of draws you back in maybe to, yes, like an earlier version or an earlier idea. But it does seem like if you're listening to it, it does kind of help guide you along the way a little bit.
And like, you have to go too far to know you went too far. Like,
yeah, totally. Yeah.
And Nance, what do you like about editing? I don't think I've ever heard that before about people like editing so much. What I guess 2-parter, what do you like about it? And are there specific techniques? Like I'm a prose writer, not a songwriter. So I'll tell you as a prose writer, when I edit, when I need to be more concise, the first thing I do is I look for prepositions, because prepositions always drag out sentences. They always make them longer than they need to be. And they just, too many prepositions stacked on top of each other just really makes a sentence sag. And I hate it. That's the first thing. So that's a deliberate part of my process. So I'd love to know if there's when you go to edit, is it just, I'm just going to see what I have to take out, or are there specific things that you look for?
And editing and writing, I almost don't think of them as different, It's like you're hunting for the thing. And I think of it like, my kid got this like little kit where there's a gemstone and you have to dig it out with a little tiny digger and then you like brush it off and you're trying to find a thing that already exists, and like you have to dig around and like find and throw things away to find the thing. And I would say for me, like lyrically, the thing about songs, I guess for me, the main things are first thing is how it feels coming out of the mouth. Like, how does it sound? Because that's kind of like the paramount situation, because these things are sung, they're not on the page. And it's like, they just have to feel right. They sound right. Does it sound right? And then the next question for me is usually like, is the image stack right? And that's in the sort of cooking thing of where you were saying like a word against a chord, but it's like, if you put the word crystal in a song, which we did, right? Did we do that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Crystal City.
Crystal City.
And we put in Crystal Mountain also, right? It's like it means something, and then you stack it.
Crystal Mountain, yep.
You stack it with the word mountain, and it means a thing, and it summons a thing, and it's totally like it's like a physical feeling if the image stack starts to like achieve liftoff. So for me, it's like I'll be like, oh, this image isn't maybe achieving the liftoff for me or whatever. But also it has to sound right. And so that's, I could easily sit there and write what feel like the right images on the page, and then it would never sing right. So like, yeah.
It reminds me of when people talk about how when they edit prose, they use that voice to text. They have it read back to them by word. And to me, that's not the same because as a prose writer, I need to feel how those words sound in my mouth when I say them. And having it read back to me just isn't the same. I know it's different, but good prose writing is euphonic. It also sounds good. And I need to feel, I can hear awkward sounds and unintended repetition when my jaws are making those sounds. I can't hear them if something else if it's read back to me.
Right, totally. What's also really cool, sorry, this is kind of adjacent to what I was saying before, is like working with the three of us, like we all have different images in our lives and they're all going in the songs. And like, I'm thinking about mandolin, singing to the mandolin, Josh, and like how we arrived at the fire escape, right? It's sitting on the fire escape. And that was from like a photograph or like an idea. It wasn't the first thought. It was like, but it's so evocative. Like it just summons the fire escape and like something about your youth and like being in a city and whatever. And then like the chip in the China saucer,
Yeah.
Ugh. Which feels like from a different time of life, a different phase of life when you have a China saucer and it has a chip in it. And you're
totally. Yeah.
So it's like a real, all of these images from our lives, and the images, of course, that are like just in the ether and in like folk music, all just going in the pot together.
Sometimes we would like write. I sometimes feel like with the old folk songs, we write our own personal life back into those songs sometimes, or they just surprise us, And I'm thinking specifically of on the new record where what am I thinking of, Aeneas, where they were keeping the baby warm, but then I accidentally said keeping the babies warm, and then
Rock the Cradle.
On Rock the Cradle, Annie. There's like and all of a sudden it was like I looked up and like Eric and Aeneas and Bella were like, the babies. Oh, it has to be the babies. My wife and I just had twins, so there wasn't just one baby, there were two. So little things like that where yeah. I don't know if that speaks to what we were talking about, but it was something I just remembered.
All right, Eric, let me ask you this. What was then I'll ask each of you this question, but Eric, we'll start with you. What was in your view the most challenging song on the double album to finish? Was one that maybe you just thought we should give up on this, but you're glad you didn't? What was the most challenging song?
None of them. I didn't find any of them to be really altogether that challenge. Like we had things like something like "See You Free," which was like that was more like it wasn't like I was finding it challenging, but I didn't really necessarily think that one was going to happen. And Josh really was like, got stuck on that one, which was sort of came out of like this in-studio jam that just had a vibe to it. And then I sort of like maybe took a stab at writing. It was sort of like the last thing that came together. So maybe that one would be the closest thing, but I wouldn't even say it was challenging. It was more like, or I didn't let it challenge me. I was just like, eh. And then it turned out to be amazing because Josh wanted it to happen. And and I can let Josh and Aeneas speak because I ended up sort of working on it. We all sort of worked on it remotely. It was the last thing that happened, but maybe that would be the closest thing. But again, it wasn't so much challenging, I don't think.
Aeneas, how about you?
Like what was the hardest one?
Yeah.
I definitely like remember getting a little obsessed with tumbling down, like going in a bit of a rabbit hole with a lot of different verses on that one. And like, and then I don't know, ultimately it was like, let's not overthink this. It doesn't need to, it didn't need that, like, didn't need that much. It's so in the feel of the song and the chorus that it was almost like it was easier than I was thinking that it was. But that one is one that I remember just being like, what the fuck is this song? Like, what happens? Who's in this song? What is it? These dogs? Is it like adventure song? Is it Josh? Is it Eric? Is it a random, is this a mother that he's leaving or a lover? What happens? Does he have success out in the wide blue world or not? Do you guys feel me?
Yeah.
But I love the song. I think it turned out cool.
Josh, how about you?
Songs that were hard.
Or challenging. Yeah.
Challenging. I think Singing to the Mandolin actually needed to be wrestled quite a bit, but it was I think maybe because that was one where I think we had to figure out like where we were. That's the song Aeneas was referencing earlier, where there's like these kind of images from. It's almost like there's like images from like sort of like present day, and then there's these like images from youth, and then there's like some like sort of like connective stuff in the middle there, and we're kind of all talking about all three of our lives at once. And I think we ended up at something that's super emotional and feels great, but it took some editing though.
Eric, how about you? What was the easiest? Was there one that was the easiest one that just flowed bubblingly, as Mencken said?
Well, the seed of Lover Take It Easy, I dreamed, which is a rare one. It's only twice. The other one was a Fruit Bat song that Josh produced called Rips Me Up, which also was a dream song. So when a song comes out like that, it's pretty cool. And obviously like then we collaborated on it, but the seed of it, which was the line "Got to Take It Easy," and I can't I think Aeneas had at one point I think like we always like to have like just words that we like, some of which we didn't use the word pony.
Did use pony?
Did we use pony?
You put pony. You put a pony in the your arms.
But I know you had lover. Well, I feel like you were like, we got to have like referred
I like that.
to lover. So but that song I felt like that one was sort of early, and it was, funnily enough, the dream was we were on Bonny Light Horseman tour also, and I was horribly jet lagged. So, but yeah, anything that can kind of happen in that way, that's the subconscious is working overtime for you.
Yeah, and that's what we're gonna say.
That was the song I was going to choose, like because you came with that dream seed. And then I felt like the way we went at that one, it's very, it's so archetypal, like, and it does lean on the folk music. There's actually like the idea of Sally Garden, right? Like this Yeats poem, which has been set to music, different music, which is beautiful, called Sally Garden. And then just the idea, I don't know, of like you laid your little hand, like the lightness of someone laying their little hand, and then the like hardness of someone grasping at someone's waist, and just like these things feel old as the hills, they just kind of came together. That didn't seem like it took a lot of effort. That felt a lot like a gem that was coming out of the dirt.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
That same day that we put that together, I think we put Old Dutch together, which is very like our Beatles day in the life kind of thing, like where it really was like three of us completely like just taking three chunks of things and like three big pieces of clay kind of coming together, one big thing. That one felt kind of easy to do, and even though it's very sort of ambitious and kind of epic sounding, I think the lyrics were hard fought, but like I feel like that one was like, whoa, that was something.
I have a really hard time talking about writing songs with you guys because I want to. It makes me want to do it so bad. Like I wish we were just working on a song right now instead of talking about it.
I know. I feel that way when we finish a record. I get like so like uncomfortable that I have to start talking about the next one immediately.
Yeah, you do.
It's funny because I have this quote up here by Dorothy Parker she says, I hate writing, but I love having written. I love that idea, right? That I hate writing, but I love having written. And I was thinking about that with the editing process today. So you talked about that. Like maybe we like editing because we're just done with the writing. All right, last question. I know I always end with this. What have we been reading lately? Books, anything like that. I just finished reading An Immense World by Ed Young. He's a writer for the New Yorker, and I think it's called An Immense World, but it won the Pulitzer Prize. It's a nonfiction book. It's all about, I think the term is Umwelt. It's a German word, but the whole book is about the sensory experiences of animals, about how we're seeing them in the wrong way, how they view, because of their senses, they view the world in a completely different way than we do. And it was a fascinating book, and it's incredible. It really gets you thinking about our relationship to animals to begin with. But it was a fascinating book, and each chapter is about a different sense and about how animals use those senses and how they perceive the world. And I also just finished reading Best American Short Story Anthology, because I realize about myself that I'm a voice person. So my first thought when I finish an author is not what else can I read from that author, it's what else can I read from someone else, so I can get different voices in my head. So that's why I love anthologies, because it's like an anthology is like 25 different voices and they're not the same. And you can go, wow, that's so different from what I just read. But that's just me. Now, some people, when they finish a book, their first thought is, what else can I read by that person? So that's what I've read. So Eric, we'll start with you. Anything? Go ahead.
I haven't read anything in years. I didn't read. I'm a weirdo. Like it's not that I don't, but I am. I'm always like, I get this question a lot, and I'm always just like feel like such a idiot. But I haven't read anything in years.
I was hoping the answer would be different this time around, but that's okay. So
didn't I answer you that last time too?
I know, and I tried to give you ample time to maybe.
Reading. I love reading too. It's not like I don't know. Like I'm always making things and writing things myself too. So, and I should be like, I actually did just we have this great bookstore in LA called The Last Bookstore. Do you know that bookstore? It's in downtown LA, which is kind of like Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
Neighborhood, but it's one of those great kind of labyrinthian, used bookstores. And I did buy, I bought a bunch of books. So, I could tell you that I want to read. I got a book of Yeats plays.
Nice.
I like to buy plays. The Albie's Virginia Woolf play. Some Chekhov plays. This Jack Kerouac autobio that I was obsessed with in high school called Desolate Angel, written by Dennis McNally. The American Heritage Book of Idioms, and some E.E. Cummings plays. So I'm making an effort, but I haven't read any of them. Yeah.
Okay, so let me say this, a couple of things. At our wedding, we had read my favorite love poem ever is the E. Cummings poem, Somewhere I've Never Traveled Gladly Beyond. And it is the best love poem ever. You should read it. And the last line is no one, not even the rain has such small hands. And I love E. Cummings. I mean, but that is a fantastic poem. Unfortunately, he gets kind of cartoonish. People see him as this guy who uses lowercase and weird punctuation, but his poems are astoundingly deep. And I love that you have that. And then really quickly, my PhD is in 20th century American theater playwrights. So when you talk about, yeah, I think you said Thornton Wilder, or no, what do you have? Do you have Thornton Wilder? What's the one?
Albee. But you know
Albee, that's right.
I will say I just read, which I had read before. I actually did just read True West, the Sam Shepard play. So I've been reading plays, I guess.
That is the off-Broadway original poster I bought on eBay.
Yeah.
For Buried Child. Sam Shepard was one of my dissertation topics.
It's not a book, but it's a play. But I did read that like a couple months ago.
And really quickly, Sam Shepard, if you like his writing, he wrote 2 novels that were published right before he died. And one's a novel, one's a novella. And they're amazing because it's the same language, the same images that are in his plays. And it's fantastic.
His writing is very musical to me, and especially like something like True West with people talking to each other. It's inspiring for lyric writing for me.
Yeah. Aeneas, how about you?
Yeah. So I'm in New York right now, and I'm actually seeing a ton of shows. So I don't know if it counts as reading, but I did watch. Oh, and I got to tell you guys about this play called Stereophonic. I was texting Josh about it. It's on Broadway. It's opening tomorrow night, and it's a play with music, and the songs are written by Will Butler, and it's basically like a fictionalized account of sort of a band that resembles Fleetwood Mac, and it's in the studio. It's like set in the studio. So you're looking at the console in the control room. That's what the stage is. And then there's a pane of glass, and the players can like go back on the floor and actually sing the songs. And then they're like, and it's kind of incredible, and it's really well written, and it's so intense to watch it as a musician because it's really pretty faithful to some studio stuff. So I hope you guys can all see it. And then I order a lot of books. I'm sorry, I order books from Amazon that I don't read. But I'll show you. I've got with me. This is some fragments of Sappho, if not Winter. So Anne Carson translations of Sappho. A lot of these are for this play that I'm trying to write right now. Another Anne Carson book that I'm like kind of read twice this year because I think it's so important, Eros the Bittersweet. And I also got this book called Centering, which is written in the 1960s it's basically like a philosophy book from a potter that's like a ceramics person, MC Richards, kind of like a thing. I'm also reading this white women book because I'm in like a white women book club. My friend trying to do some anti-racism reading.
Real quick, and then Josh, I want to ask you, but I believe, Eric, the True West, the original Broadway production, if I recall, was Gary Sinise and John Malkovich, I think, played, which you can imagine how amazing that would have been.
That's deep Chicago stuff, too, because that's where I'm from. That they were like the founders of the Steppenwolf.
Right.
Yeah.
If I have that right, I think those two are the ones that did the Broadway premiere. It was incredible. So, sorry, Josh, go ahead.
Oh, it's funny, Eric, that with your preamble of not reading, but because the book that I've been chipping away at is Electric Eden, which Eric actually sent me as a gift.
Me too.
Maybe sent it to Aeneas too.
You're better than me.
And it's by Rob Young, and it's really, really good. It's like, especially if you're like a nerdy record music person, it's all about British folk revival, but it does dig into some pretty like deep, old British, Irish, Scottish history of folk music too. And it was kind of like came at an incredible time where we write a lot of songs in this open tuning, which is maybe boring music stuff and not for this podcast, but it's like there's a really incredible chapter about Davy Graham, who, if you don't know him, is a incredible like super influential British guitar player and music person. Anyway, it talks about him going down to Africa and learning these modal tunings, and then they describe them. And I was like, this is a portal into like our next record for me, because I was like getting really excited. So it kind of was able to jump out of the page and into my hands, which was really special. But yeah, that's that. And and then a perennial classic for my 3-year-old boys called "Who Needs Donuts When You Have Love," which they love. It has awesome illustrations.
That Electric Eden book was basically like, I think it came out, I want to say it came out around it came out a few years before we started our band. And then when we started our band, I was like, have you guys read that book, Electric Eden? Because it felt so appropriate. But then it had gone out of print. And then not really that long ago, I was at I guess I'm shouting out all my local LA bookstores, a great bookstore on Sunset called Stories, which is one of my happy places. And they had, it apparently is back in print, and they had 3 copies. And I was like the guy and it's a big book too. And I was like a dorky guy who just grabbed the 3 copies and bought them because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to send them. So yeah.
It's so good, and the chapter on the water sins is amazing too. It's really, really fun,
and it goes literally to like when you get to the end. It goes up to it. They talk about like Aphex Twin and talk
amazing,
like it's like where they go into like deep 80s new wave and stuff like that, but stuff that where they sort of like tie it to sort of like English pastoralism too. It's really, really, really very cool.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget my book, Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, comes out June 25th on Hachette Books. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is one of the guitarists in the band Lamb of God, and this is his memoir. It's a damn good book, if I do say so myself. But again, that book is out June 25th on Hachette Books. You can pre-order it now everywhere, your favorite online bookstore. So be sure to do that. The site, Songwriters on Podcast, contains all of the archived episodes of the podcast. Of course, you can find them on all streaming platforms as well, but they're also on the site. I only have had the podcast for about... I don't think even 2 years. Before that, all of the interviews were transcribed, and that took a lot of work. And that's why I started the podcast. So if you want to read the interviews that I did before the podcast, they are on Songwriters on Podcast as well. There are about 200 of them going back to 2010. So check those out. If you want to get a hold of me, ben@songwritersonprocess.com, or fill out a form on the website. I'm here for your questions, your complaints, your concerns, or your interview suggestions. I'd love getting those as well. So hit me up. I will try to respond. So that's it, everyone. Have a great day and see you next time.